Andy's talked us through some of the range of things that crop up when we decide to assess students by examination. What I'm going to be reporting on here is one of the Centre for Education Innovation's small grants. We applied last year for a small grant to basically employ students to go and find out from other students what were their expectations and experiences in relation to examination feedback. And it's that project I'm going to be reporting on in this set of slides. I suppose we need to bear in mind as I go through this that just because you want something doesn't mean you get something in life. Yeah, and that goes for examination feedback as well. But listen, what I'm going to run through is the student perspective. And this might be something that, as people working closely with students, you're tuned into. But nevertheless, it was quite nice to say, go and run some focus groups. I won't attend, students speaking to students, and tell us what you expect. Tell us what your experience is of this process. Okay, so I'm going to very quickly give you an introduction to the project. Think through, this will echo some of what Andy's told us about positives and negatives of examinations from a staff perspective, and then go into what the student perspective is in relation to exam feedback, and that will be the main body of the presentation. And then students also went and spoke to lots of different schools across the university, directors of learning and teaching, to try and find out, again, we sort of know what we think happens, but get a student to do that work and give their perspective on what schools' practices are. So there'll be a short summary of what some schools' practices are in relation to exam feedback. So, quick discussion. Hands up in the air if you had exams when you studied at university, if you did go to university. Okay. Nearly everyone. Okay. Did you get feedback on your examinations? Raise your hand. Wow. And therein lies part of the issue of why this is such a fascinating project. We all experience exams, and yet there are 2 people in the room that got any feedback on their examinations. We might think, well, has that changed? I think there are surveys out there, there's data out there which suggests that maybe 1 in 10 students gets individual feedback on examinations, but generally speaking, we can see the issue here. This is when it starts to become a little bit discordant with everything we say about assessment and everything we say about feedback. If we talk about assessment being for learning rather than of learning, if we say that our feedback is constructive and helpful, we have external survey, then we say, actually, there's a lot of students just not getting feedback, or what that student would not consider to be helpful or detailed feedback. I'm going to move to the positives and negatives of examinations in a little moment, but this is a little bit more about the project. As I say, we got a seed corn project to employ some students. These were students based in arts, humanities and social sciences, so it was a cross-college project, and it may reflect a little bit what arts, humanities and social sciences subject students would expect of examinations. I'm conscious that there might be very different types of examinations as we go beyond the college and across the university. What I'm focusing on are these formal scheduled examinations, things that look like that. It's kind of interesting, isn't it, when Andy was saying, what do you do in the real world? Well, in the real world, they're not going to be doing a lot of that, I doubt, a lot of the time. But it's focused on the formal examinations that happen during the examination period, so we're not looking at class tests. The objective was to just try and explore the issue about why we were continually getting concerns from some schools and across the university around examinations generally, but also about examination feedback in particular. So, things that I think are good about examinations as a form of assessment, just as though I'm not someone who just I don't dislike examinations, they have their place. The good things, I think, really, if assessment drives students' learning, then having an unseen examination at the conclusion of the module is quite a nice way, I think, of encouraging students to engage with the breadth of their curriculum. Particularly important, I think, for professional disciplines. I teach those, where I want those students to know a little bit about something that everyone out there professionally is going to expect them to know about. So they cover the ground on the basis that it might be in the examination. I think exams are particularly good for foundational learning, getting the basics, the core of our disciplinary knowledge, just acquiring that can be helpful for that. I suppose the advantage is that a student stands on their own 2 feet in an examination. They can't free write as they might in other forms of assessment. There's this idea of reduced risk of plagiarism attached to that. So again, you can't copy and claim other people's work as your own in an examination, or not so easily. And then there's a couple of advantages at the bottom. Quicker to mark. I think that's a lot of the reason why in high volume modules it might be that and we choose examinations as a form of assessment, and our own workload modelling practices suggest that exams take less time to mark than coursework. And of course, Andy pointed out, some students just perform well in examinations, so they ought to be in there as part of a balanced approach to an assessment diet. Some of the negatives, I started today's session with saying about my housemates' anxiety and stress as they approached examination period when I was a student. There are other things that as a university I think exams cause us a bit of a challenge with. Timetabling, that typically comes across in students' concerns. They don't know when their assessment is until potentially 5 weeks before. And then that might not map out as they might have commitments around those exam scheduling. So students also tell us that exams can be congested. Now the university does have guidelines about what's an appropriate amount of examination to have in a particular time window, but we never approach that, and students still tell us that they find that exam schedules are congested. They may even consider 3 exams in the same week to be problematic, whereas the university's official rules suggest that's perfectly fine. The fact that students don't have resources at hand in an examination, and the exam may therefore not be so authentic. Yeah, so when was the last time you kind of were divorced from lots of materials you draw on? Sometimes we do that, and sometimes that might be a very authentic form of assessment to say you can't have all that information, you've got to just have what's in your head and work with that. But in a lot of times, my students, I removed an examination from a module because students said, I'm having to cram so much case law on planning that I don't really can't remember it. It's a memory test, isn't it, Neil? And in the real world, when I was working in a council or a consultancy, I'd just be able to go and pull the law out and have it at hand. So we just got rid of it, and we did something a little bit different. Handwriting and legibility. Anyone struggling at the minute with marking exam scripts where they're trying to work out what the student wrote? Yeah? So, and it's about handwriting and legibility for feedback as well. But certainly students writing with a pen for 3 hours, very rare. So when Andy said, does anyone do that? So someone who marks exam scripts might do that. Yeah? But generally speaking, in the real world, we tend not to do that. Exams tend to be limited feedback, and they also put pressure on you as staff, sometimes in having a limited period of time. If you've got an exam towards the end of the exam period, you've got an exam board coming up, you're not going to get a lot of time to necessarily give quality feedback of any kind. The other challenge is that scripts and feedback are not easy to access or administer. Yeah. Try and imagine, you're writing an academic paper for a journal. Lots of you here are academics. You're writing a journal, yeah? You're writing for a journal, you send in your article, you get the feedback and the reviewer's comments, but I say, you're not allowed to see what you wrote ever again. Yeah? You can't actually see how that feedback from the reviewer links to the paper that you actually wrote. It's a curious disconnect between what we provide back as feedback and what student actually provided as their text for the examination script. So there's lots of things that just, I think, when we use exams, if we don't anticipate these things, if we don't think about what their impacts are on a program as a whole, we might stack ourselves up a series of problems that students are inevitably going to tell us that they're not content with this. So what do students actually tell us? Well, what did the students who worked for us as co-researchers go and find out? Well, bear in mind that when you do ask someone, you will get told. Yeah? So they will kind of tell us what they're expecting. So, first of them, access to examination scripts. There's lots of kind of confusing issues here for from a student perspective. Our students across this university do not know consistently what they can and cannot have access to. Okay, so immediately we've got a situation where we don't quite know what we're allowed to see. The students certainly don't know. You can put students in a focus group. Some said, oh, you can't see your exam script, can you? And someone in the same focus group said, yeah, I asked to see mine, saw it, no problem, it's great. Really useful feedback. Another student then said, well, I didn't know you could do that. Okay, so we've instantly got this information problem. We have some students in the focus group telling us this. At Cardiff, you have to fail to get access to your examination script. Okay, how perverse is that? Yeah. You want people to perform better, yeah, but I want to perform better. I've got 45. If I got 36, I'd be able to get some feedback. Isn't that crazy? So if you can see from a student perspective how they're concerned about this. This is the most important point, though, when the students are giving us feedback in the focus groups about their exam feedback. They cannot remember what they wrote in the examination. Okay, that's probably for me one of the most fundamental points out of this project. If they can't remember what they wrote, what use is the feedback? You're giving me feedback, but I can't remember what I wrote. So they have, the feedback is instantly of less value if we withhold or do not allow or do not communicate to students the possibility, if it exists, of seeing their examination script. Okay? So they need to see what they wrote for your feedback to be meaningful. That's the key message here. The final bullet point on this slide is an indication as well that something came out of the focus groups with the students saying, well, it was a lot harder to get to see an examination script at university than it was at A-level. Okay, so if you're a British student or gone through the Irish or the British education system, your expectations of university might be conditioned by what access you might have had to examinations prior to coming to university. So to summarise all that up, we need to think very carefully about if and when it's appropriate to open up access to examination scripts by students if what we're doing elsewhere for exam feedback is going to be meaningful for them. Generic or cohort examination feedback, I'm going to talk a little bit about that after the coffee break later today, about what might make for good generic feedback. But we need to bear in mind how students react to generic feedback. So students tell us that the most important aspect of generic feedback is the capacity to benchmark my individual performance in relation to my cohort. That's what they tell us. So that's what they want. Did I do well in relation to how others performed in the examination? So some sense of benchmarking performance is what students might like out of generic feedback. When we say, did you get it? This is what they're telling us. Yeah, really quite concerned. We've just kind of marked 200 scripts. We put some generic feedback together. We put it into Learning Centre and say, hey, look at all this. Students, sometimes, not all students, well, I suppose it's better than nothing, isn't it? Wow. Okay. A half measure to placate students. Yeah, that's worrying as well. That we're trying to do what we think are good things for good reasons with a certain amount of resource, and yet students might not be seeing it as particularly helpful. And the main concern, well, it's not my work, is it? It doesn't help me. Yeah? It doesn't help me. I might have done very well. I don't know if I did very well, really. I haven't got a grade, but I don't know if I performed badly in one answer and really well in another, because I can't get access to my script. Okay? So if a student can't relate it to their own work, then is it even feedback from a student perspective? We need to think about that. Does our feedback help that student improve? Well, maybe, maybe not. It depends maybe how we scaffold, what we put around the feedback that we put out there. And given my role in the college, this is the NSS statement. I received helpful comments on my work. Well, actually I didn't. Yeah? I got some generic feedback. Yeah? I got access to an exam script even, but I didn't actually receive helpful comments on my work. Yeah? So how students are interpreting this is really quite important as well. Here we're on to what, I'm going to explore this issue of individual and feedback in relation to generic feedback a little bit more here. When we say what do students want, well, the National Union of Students has for a period of time, or at various points in time, has campaigned for individual feedback on examinations. Okay, that's the gold standards where it would like us to arrive at as a sector. The thing coming out of our focus group here, though, around individual exam feedback is, why don't I get individual feedback on my exams? No one's ever explained it to me as a student in many cases. I get individual feedback on coursework, fine, and they tell me that, yeah, lots of feed forward, how it helps to improve, but why don't I get it on exams? What's your argument? Why does someone throw me a very quick response? Why don't we do individual feedback on exams? Mark that question. It's too time consuming. It's often around practical considerations. But a student with a particular mindset, perhaps, I'm not saying it's a mindset you might not want to change, but a student with a particular mindset, I say, well, why? Yeah, I mean, I've got a module where I get feedback because I do coursework, I've got a module where I do exams, and I don't get it. And then I see all this stuff around the university about owning your feedback, and I don't actually get it. Yeah? I don't understand. Okay? So practice within schools on whether they provide individual feedback is really quite variable. Again, more information from the NUS. This was a charter that it had out about 7 years ago. It was putting these particular messages around. Feedback should not be exclusive to certain forms of assessment. It did a survey. Would you like to receive exam feedback? Well, yeah, why not, I suppose. This has to be contrasted. So 90% of students said in their survey, yeah, it's like programs, 90% of people in the survey said, yeah, we'd like exam feedback. Okay. How many students actually pick it up? Our experience from schools is that actually even if we provide exam feedback, it's not always being collected. So this is an express demand for exam feedback, not how many people would actually pick it up and use it. More recently, the National Union of Students, thinking about what students want and expect from exam feedback, have this. Has anyone seen this document, the benchmarking tool? Some of you, it's worth having a look. It's much nicer than the charter that preceded it. The charter just sort of made demands. This is a framework for improvement, and it's got 5 different categories and says, well, over here is kind of very basic and not good enough. Up here is excellent and amazing and aspirational practice for many, but nevertheless gold standard. These are the 3 elements on the right-hand side in relation to feedback. So feedback in the developed category. So this is where I think we are for many of our elements at Cardiff. Feedback, there may be exam feedback, but it could be generic. Yeah, okay. Refining individual feedback on all forms of assessment, including exams, and then over on this side, including exams, it's detailed and constructive, i.e. feedback on an examination that might also feed forward, yeah, but for an individual. It's worth having a look at because it's something out there that kind of expresses collectively what some students' expectations might be. So that's the individual versus generic. What about this idea that if you need extra help, you can go and see a tutor? So we put our feedback out there. This is what our students told us around additional feedback opportunities. So they've got their exam result, they might have seen the script possibly. What if they still expect or want some feedback? Well, students want opportunity for one-to-one discussion. Again, there's lots of varying practice and reports across the university about how many students take up that opportunity. And the big fear in many schools is, what if everyone takes up that opportunity? Yeah, so that's the big challenge that we face as staff. But students are noting really inconsistent practices within schools, between members of staff, in what is available to them here. So that might be great. Someone might be kind of almost driving themselves into the ground to do it, but is that helpful if other people in the school say, I genuinely don't have enough time? So it leads to a very inconsistent practice. And then, well, Neil's helpful, yeah, but Andy, he won't see you. Yeah? So we get a lot of that happening. Students also told us in focus groups that even when they go and it's quite daunting. It was an interesting insight into the experience of maybe not having done well in an examination, not done as well as you wanted, not done as well as your lecturer might expect you to, possibly. And can be quite tense for students, going and getting extra feedback from someone who's already told you that you are not actually done very well, to now go and ask for more information about why I didn't do very well. Okay, so students, the point here though is that oral one-to-one feedback, students can come out of that still not remembering what it is that the feedback was. So it's still not a lot of use. If we want our feedback to be useful, that student needs to have some kind of ability to recall or note it or some. I think some of our students, they also said that there are people in the university who say, come and see me, I will talk to you. You're not allowed to take notes. Well, okay. Curious practice. I don't know if there's some kind of legal concern behind it, but nevertheless, you can come. I'll talk to you. Don't take any notes, please. And when you leave, the student thinks, well, I can't even remember properly what he said about how I should improve my work. Students also say that we look busy. We are, yeah, but they feel guilty sometimes in asking for support. They want it, but they won't ask, yeah, because they know that you're a busy lecturer. We know as well from the focus groups that students tend to come and see us for extra feedback in 2 circumstances. Now this is when some of my academic colleagues across the university will say, I offered them to come and see me, but it was the ones that did well that came to see me, yeah? Not the ones that really need the help. Why are they coming to see you? Well, Some of them are coming to see you because they've done better than they thought they might do. And they would like to know a little bit more about what it was in what they wrote that led them to be better than they thought they were. Okay, so at the other end, of course, the disasters, the people not achieving as what they wanted to, they may come as well. So people might come and see you because they have surprisingly done well. So don't just say, well, they've done well. What do they need? They need to understand why they did well. And finally, on this point, feedback. We think, well, there's potentially a lot of students to see, isn't it? Could we use our personal tutoring systems to help deliver that? Well, students say, well, not ideally. Yeah, I want the feedback from the person that marked my work. Okay, so if we think that personal tutoring is the way to resolve it, it might help, but it's not quite what students are really hoping for. I'm going to move to timely examination feedback now. Yeah, this will freak you out. Okay, 4-week feedback turnaround time. Most students think, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, a lot of students will say, actually, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, after exam board. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. They understand. Partly because, especially in the summer period, if they've passed everything, they're not going to be assessed in anything for maybe another 5-6 months. Yeah, so there's no urgency that students has this. However, jumping back to this second bullet point, some students want that feedback. How quickly do you think they want it on an exam? A week. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. No. So just I can see people go, oh no. Just some students' expectations, but I think they're easily outweighed by these others, I think, who are happy to wait till after the examination. What should we do though? Should we allow students to access it if they want it, or wait if they also prefer to wait? The key thing, and this was kind of, again, another source of anxiety for students, sometimes they don't mind waiting a bit longer. What they really want to know is when it is coming. Yeah, to be clear about that. Some students said they didn't like the surprise to find out from a friend that it went up yesterday. Oh, really? Yeah, they want to know that it's coming. So they can prepare themselves to receive it, I suspect, is what we want to do. We need to think also then about delivery of that feedback. So if we are, whatever feedback we're doing, you can't ignore access to it. So access to an annotated script is what many students would like, but we need to think about how we treat students who might not be in Cardiff when that feedback is released. Can they access their exam feedback as easily as someone in Cardiff versus someone who has returned home to Asia, for example? Do you say, well, you can come into the office and see it? Well, actually, that's not accessible, is it, for all of our students? So they were concerned that however we deliver exam feedback, it should be accessible to students who might be present in Cardiff or away. Typewritten feedback is ideal. Why? Because we can exchange it into other formats, but then that's kind of, we need to think about whether our feedback on exams is handwritten or typewritten. Again, it's a key difference with our coursework typically. All this leads me to the conclusion that our exam feedback systems are lagging, really, behind what we've done. So I can sit at my desk 2 minutes after this coursework deadline. I can start marking it. I can use all sorts of different comments. I can do a comments bank. It's all done. I hit the button, and it goes to a student who can access it wherever they are. Exam feedback, nowhere near that. Very quickly to finish off the presentation, and then we'll break for coffee. Practices across Cardiff University. Just a very, very quick summary here. So apologies if I don't quite get everything, the nuances right. Individual typewritten exam feedback. Yes, one of our schools in our college is doing that. They've made the decision to invest in that. Okay, so it's a big commitment, but it's part of what they think fits with their program and philosophy of doing things. So it takes an extraordinary amount of time and effort. It's not delivered within 4 weeks. It's delivered typically when a student returns at the next stage of their program. Yeah, so it's really good quality feedback. It's individual, it helps them kind of reflect and enhance and improve, but it's not necessarily given quickly. Many of our schools were doing this. Okay, go and see your exam script. Might have some annotations on it, might have a couple of sentences at the end, just summarising why a mark's been given or what were the deficiencies. Yep. Generic or cohort feedback then by many others, with or without access to examination scripts. Some schools are giving access to examination scripts for selected categories of students. So if you failed, you might be able to do that. And as an element of good practice, the students identified that one of our schools at the university is using the opportunities presented by Panopto, an event capture, to not just provide written generic feedback, but you sat at a desk explaining what students did and didn't do well, with all the advantages that that brings to it. Okay, so a range of practices across the university. Hopefully that's lots of food for thought about an insight to students. You might feel that actually that's kind of typical, I kind of understood that, or it may have thrown out some things where you think actually their expectations are here. What can we do about speaking to them to help manage their expectations, and what else can we do to deliver? Okay, so